Think candlelight, laughter, and roasted boar. Think again. Tonight, we're crashing a medieval wedding feast where the food was questionable, the entertainment was wild, and the guests might end up fighting or vomiting. From rancid stews to bizarre rituals and drunken nobles toppling off benches, this wasn't exactly your Pinterest fairy tale. So lie back, dust, and let's tiptoe into the noisy, messy, and unforgettable chaos of love and medieval celebration. If unexpected details from history's strangest moments help your mind relax at night, you've found your cozy corner. Subscribe now and tap the bell icon to return each evening for a new tale from the dusty pages of the past. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. You awaken before dawn to the sound of clanging pots and shouted orders echoing through the stone corridors of the castle. The year is 1387, and you are one of nearly 200 servants tasked with preparing for what will become a 3-day wedding feast that will test the very limits of human endurance. As you stumble through the darkness toward the kitchens, the acrid smell of smoke and burning wood already fills your nostrils, a harbinger of the hellish conditions that await you in the bowels of this medieval celebration. The great kitchen of the castle stretches before you like a vision from Dante's Inferno, with massive hearths blazing along the walls and steam rising from countless cauldrons. The heat is already oppressive at this early hour, and you know it will only intensify as the day progresses. The head cook, a grizzled man with permanently singed eyebrows and burns covering his forearms, begins barking orders that will govern your life for the next 72 hours. You and your fellow servants must prepare meals for 200 guests, each course more elaborate than the last, with absolutely no margin for error in timing, preparation, or presentation. The logistics alone are staggering in their complexity. As one of the kitchen scullions, you must first help prepare the basic ingredients that will form the foundation of dozens of dishes. The bread alone requires hours of kneading and multiple ovens working in rotation to produce the hundreds of loaves needed for 3 days of feasting. But bread is merely the beginning of your ordeal. The meat preparation requires a coordination that would challenge a modern military operation. Roasted mallards, pheasants, woodcocks, and partridges must be plucked, cleaned, seasoned, and cooked to perfection. The centerpiece, a massive roasted boar's head with an apple stuffed in its mouth, requires 4 men just to lift it onto the serving platter. Your hands, already raw from the morning's work, begin to crack and bleed as you help prepare the seemingly endless varieties of meat. Open pork pies require delicate pastry work that demands precision despite the chaotic environment around you. Stuffed chickens must be deboned with painstaking care, their cavities filled with elaborate mixtures of spices, herbs, and other meats. Pottages, thick soups made with meat and vegetables, bubble constantly in enormous cauldrons that require constant stirring with ladles so heavy they strain your shoulders and back. The eel, tench, and tuna fish create their own challenges, their preparation requiring specialized knowledge of cleaning and seasoning that not every servant possesses. The key heat from the multiple hearths creates a furnace-like atmosphere that makes breathing difficult. Sweat pours down your face and back, mixing with the smoke and steam to create a grimy coating on your skin that no amount of hurried washing can remove. The danger of fire is constant and terrifying. In a kitchen filled with open flames, hanging linens, wooden implements, and servants rushing about with flammable materials, a single moment of carelessness could result in a conflagration that would not only destroy the feast, but potentially the entire castle, the preparation of fritters. Batter-fried meats and fruits requires you to work directly over vats of boiling oil, the splatter creating painful burns on your arms and face. The spiced wines must be prepared in massive quantities, some thickened with egg yolks in a process that demands constant attention to prevent curdling. Every sauce, every glaze, every seasoning blend requires precise timing and measurement, but you must accomplish this precision while working at breakneck speed in conditions that would be considered inhumane by any modern standard. As the first day progresses, the sheer volume of work begins to take its toll on everyone in the kitchen. Servants begin to snap at each other, their exhaustion and stress creating a volatile atmosphere. Minor injuries are commonplace: cuts from knives, burns from hot surfaces, scalds from boiling liquids. There is no time to properly treat these wounds. They are quickly bandaged with whatever cloth is available, and work continues without pause. The hierarchy among the kitchen staff becomes brutally apparent as more experienced servants delegate the most dangerous and unpleasant tasks to newer workers like yourself. The serving schedule adds another layer of complexity to your nightmare. The meals must be served in courses anywhere from 3 to 7, with precise timing between each one. This means that while some dishes are being prepared, others are being served, and still others are being cleaned up after. The coordination required is staggering, and any mistake in timing can result in disaster. Cold food arriving at the high table is not merely embarrassing, it can be interpreted as an insult to the Lord and his guests, potentially leading to severe punishment for those responsible. The waste generated by this massive undertaking creates its own set of problems. Bones, scraps, grease, and spoiled ingredients accumulate rapidly, attracting flies and vermin despite your best efforts to maintain cleanliness. The primitive sanitation systems of the castle are quickly overwhelmed by the volume of waste, creating unsanitary conditions that increase the risk of disease. You find yourself working in an environment where the smell of rotting food mingles with the aroma of the elaborate dishes being prepared, creating a nauseating combination that makes you question whether you'll be able to keep down the meager portions of food you're allowed during brief breaks. But perhaps the most demoralizing aspect of your situation is the knowledge that this is only the first day of 3. Your body already aches, your hands are raw and bleeding, your lungs burn from the smoke and heat, and you have barely made a dent in the preparations required for this wedding feast. As night falls and you collapse onto your straw mattress for a few precious hours of rest, you wonder how you will survive 2 more days of this medieval cooking marathon. The sounds of preparation continue even as you try to sleep, and you know that tomorrow will bring only more demanding tasks, more dangerous conditions, and more reasons to regret ever accepting employment in a castle kitchen during wedding season. Altar, second day dawns even earlier than the first, as the complexity of the feast demands increasingly sophisticated preparation times. Your body protests as you force yourself from the straw mattress, every muscle aching from the previous day's labor. The kitchen fires have been banked throughout the night but never fully extinguished, maintaining a base level of heat that makes the morning air thick and oppressive even before the day's cooking begins in earnest. You join the stream of servants shuffling toward what you've begun thinking of as the mouth of hell. The great kitchen where another 16 hours of backbreaking labor awaits. The second day's menu presents new challenges that test skills you didn't even know you possessed. The pastry work required for the elaborate tarts and meat pies demands a delicacy and precision that seems impossible given the chaotic environment and your increasingly exhausted state. Your hands, already damaged from yesterday's work, must now perform intricate tasks that require sensitivity and control. The dough must be rolled to exact thicknesses, edges must be crimped with decorative patterns, and fillings must be distributed with mathematical precision to ensure even cooking. times across dozens of individual pastries. The logistics of timing multiple dishes simultaneously creates a nightmare of coordination that pushes every servant to their breaking point. While you're carefully monitoring the baking progress of meat pies in one of the massive ovens, you must also keep track of the roasting meats on their spits, the bubbling potages in their cauldrons, and the delicate sauces that require constant stirring to prevent burning or separation. The heat generated by all these cooking processes simultaneously creates an atmosphere so stifling that several servants have already collapsed from exhaustion and had to be dragged from the kitchen to recover. The serving requirements add another layer of complexity that strains the entire operation to its limits. Each course must be presented with theatrical precision, requiring elaborate garnishes and artistic arrangements that take precious time away from food preparation. The servers themselves must be coordinated like dancers in a ballet, entering and exiting the great hall with perfect timing while carrying heavy platters loaded with scalding hot food. Any stumble, any dropped dish, any slight delay in the procession can throw off the entire sequence and result in cold food reaching the high table, a disaster that could have serious consequences for everyone involved in the kitchen operations. The physical demands of the work are beginning to show on every servant in increasingly alarming ways. Dehydration is constant despite frequent drinks of small ale, as the heat and smoke create conditions that sap moisture from your body faster than you can replace it. The smoke from the cooking fires irritates your eyes until they stream constantly, making precise work even more difficult. Your throat feels raw and scratchy from breathing the smoky air, and you develop a persistent cough that worsens throughout the day. The combination of heat, smoke, and physical exertion creates a state of constant misery that makes every task feel monumentally difficult. The kitchen hierarchy becomes increasingly brutal as stress levels rise. More experienced servants begin to treat newer workers with open hostility, viewing any mistake as a threat to their own positions and reputations. The head cook's temper grows shorter with each passing hour, and his punishments for errors become increasingly severe. You witness one servant receiving a beating with a wooden spoon for allowing a sauce to burn, while another is banished from the kitchen entirely for dropping a platter of carefully prepared fritters. The atmosphere of fear and exhaustion creates a toxic environment where survival depends not just on competence, but on avoiding the attention of increasingly volatile supervisors. The preparation of the more exotic dishes requires knowledge and techniques that push many servants beyond their capabilities. The proper seasoning of the eel requires understanding of spice combinations that most kitchen workers have never encountered. The stuffed chickens must be sewn shut with precise stitching that will hold during the cooking process, but can be easily removed for serving. The spiced wines must be heated to exact temperatures to prevent the alcohol from evaporating while ensuring the spices properly infuse into the liquid. These technical challenges would be difficult under the best of circumstances, but attempting them while exhausted, overheated, and working at breakneck speed virtually guarantees a high rate of failure. Food safety becomes an increasingly serious concern as the day progresses and exhaustion affects everyone's judgment. In the heat and chaos of the kitchen, proper food handling procedures begin to break down. Meat sits too long at dangerous temperatures while servants attend to other urgent tasks. Cross-contamination becomes inevitable as the same cutting surfaces and utensils are used for multiple types of food without proper cleaning between uses. The primitive understanding of food safety in medieval times means that many practices we would consider dangerous are simply accepted as normal, but the scale and intensity of wedding feast preparation magnify these risks exponentially. The cleaning requirements create their own nightmare scenario as the day progresses. Every pot, pan, cutting board, and utensil must be cleaned between uses, but the volume of cooking creates a backlog of dirty equipment that threatens to overwhelm the scullery workers. The primitive cleaning methods available, sand, ash, and cold water require enormous amounts of physical effort to achieve even basic cleanliness. The wastewater from this cleaning process must be disposed of somehow, but the castle's drainage systems are not designed to handle the volume generated by feast preparation. The result is an increasingly unsanitary environment where clean equipment becomes scarce just when it's needed most. As the second day draws to a close, the toll on your body and mind becomes undeniable. Your feet, swollen from standing on stone floors for endless hours, throb with each step. Your back aches from constantly bending over cutting boards and stirring cauldrons. Your hands are not only raw and bleeding, but developing infections from the constant exposure to food, water, and dirty surfaces. The combination of physical exhaustion and mental stress has pushed you to a state where simple tasks require enormous concentration and effort. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the growing realization that tomorrow's requirements will be even more demanding than today's. The final day of the feast traditionally features the most elaborate dishes and the most complex presentations. Your body is already pushed beyond its limits, your skills are strained to their breaking point, and you have one more day of this medieval hell to endure. As you collapse onto your straw mattress once again, you understand with crystal clarity why so many servants attempt to avoid kitchen duty during major celebrations, and why the wise ones seek employment elsewhere when wedding season approaches. The third and final day of the wedding feast arrives with an air of desperate urgency that permeates the entire castle kitchen. Your body has now endured 48 hours of punishment that would challenge even the strongest modern athlete, and you must somehow summon the energy and concentration needed for what tradition demands will be the most elaborate and technically challenging day of the entire celebration. The kitchen staff, reduced by those who have collapsed from exhaustion or fled in the night, must now accomplish even more with fewer hands and virtually no reserves of strength or patience remaining. The final day's menu represents the pinnacle of medieval culinary ambition, featuring dishes so complex and time-consuming that their preparation borders on the impossible given your current resources and conditions. The traditional finale requires creating edible sculptures, elaborate sugarwork, and presentations that demand artistic skills far beyond the capabilities of exhausted kitchen servants. Candied fruits must be prepared with perfect translucency and delicate handling that your battered hands can barely manage. Wafers require precise timing and temperature control that becomes nearly impossible when your judgment is clouded by exhaustion and your movements slowed by accumulated injuries. The pressure to create a memorable finale for the wedding celebration means that no shortcuts can be taken, no compromises can be made, and no failures can be tolerated. The bride and groom, their families, and their guests expect this final day to surpass everything that has come before, creating an impossible standard that pushes everyone in the kitchen beyond their breaking point. The head cook, himself on the verge of collapse, becomes increasingly tyrannical in his demands, threatening severe punishment for anyone whose work falls short of perfection. The atmosphere in the kitchen transforms from merely difficult to actively dangerous as exhausted servants make increasingly frequent mistakes while handling sharp knives, boiling liquids, and open flames. The coordination required for the final day's presentation reaches levels of complexity that would challenge modern event planners with all their technological advantages. Multiple courses must be prepared simultaneously, each with its own timing requirements and temperature needs. The traditional procession of the final courses requires choreographing dozens of servants carrying elaborate presentations through crowded corridors to the Great Hall, where any stumble or delay can ruin hours of meticulous preparation. The servers themselves, exhausted from 3 days of constant work, must somehow maintain the grace and precision required for these ceremonial presentations, while carrying heavy loads and navigating treacherous stone floors made slippery by spilled food and drink. Your physical condition by this point has deteriorated to a level that would require medical attention in any modern context. The cuts on your hands have become infected despite your attempts to keep them clean, causing painful swelling that makes gripping utensils increasingly difficult. The constant exposure to smoke has left your lungs feeling raw and congested, making every breath an effort. Dehydration, despite regular consumption of small ale, has left you dizzy and prone to dangerous lapses in concentration around the kitchen's many hazards. The combination of sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and poor nutrition has created a state where even simple tasks require enormous mental effort. The waste and sanitation problems that have been building throughout the 3-day celebration reach crisis proportions on the final day. The primitive waste disposal systems of the medieval castle simply cannot handle the volume of scraps, grease, spoiled food, and wash water generated by feast preparation of this magnitude. The kitchen floors become treacherous with accumulated grease and food debris, creating slip hazards that add to the already dangerous working conditions. The smell of rotting food and human waste begins to overpower even the aromas of cooking food, creating an environment so nauseating that many servants struggle to keep down the minimal nutrition they're able to consume during brief breaks. The final presentations required for the wedding feast's conclusion demand skills and materials that push the medieval kitchen far beyond its intended capabilities. Creating elaborate sugar sculptures requires techniques that few servants have ever learned, forcing improvisation and experimentation at the worst possible time. The decorative elements expected for the final courses, intricate pastry work, artistic arrangement of ingredients, and ceremonial garnishes, require steady hands and clear vision that become impossible to maintain in your current condition. The pressure to create these masterpieces while working in hellish conditions almost guarantees that many attempts will fail, wasting precious ingredients and time that cannot be recovered. As the final hours of preparation approach, the kitchen transforms into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Servants snap at each other over minor issues, fights break out over access to cooking equipment, and the normal hierarchy begins to break down as everyone struggles simply to complete their assigned tasks. Several servants have collapsed entirely and been carried from the kitchen while others continue working despite obvious injuries and illness. The head cook's authority becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as exhaustion and stress push everyone beyond their normal limits of endurance and tolerance. The moment of final service arrives with a mixture of relief and terror that epitomizes the entire 3-day experience. As the last elaborate dishes are carried from the kitchen to the great hall, you stand among the surviving servants in a state of complete physical and emotional exhaustion. Your clothes are soaked with sweat, blood, and food stains. Your hands shake from fatigue and pain. Your vision blurs from smoke exposure and dehydration. The kitchen around you looks like a battlefield with broken equipment, spilled food, and the accumulated debris of 3 days of intensive cooking scattered across every surface. But even as the last course leaves the kitchen, your ordeal is far from over. The massive cleanup required after a feast of this magnitude will take days to complete, and much of that work will fall to the same servants who have already endured this 3-day marathon. Every pot must be scrubbed, every surface cleaned, every piece of equipment restored to working condition. The accumulated waste must be disposed of, the floors scrubbed clean, and the entire kitchen restored to a state where normal meal preparation can resume. As you begin the monumental task of cleaning up after this medieval wedding feast, you finally understand why experienced servants fear and avoid kitchen duty during major celebrations. The combination of impossible working conditions, physical demands that push human endurance to its limits, and the constant threat of injury or punishment creates an experience that borders on torture. You've survived 3 days in the kitchen of hell, but the scars, both physical and mental, will remind you for months to come why accepting such work represents one of the worst decisions a medieval servant could possibly make. You arrive at the castle gates in your finest garments, believing yourself to be attending a joyous celebration of matrimony, but you are about to discover that medieval wedding feasts are elaborate theatrical performances where your social standing, political alliances and future prospects will be put on merciless display for all to witness and judge. The seemingly simple act of where you sit during the 3-day celebration will reveal not only your current status in the complex hierarchy of medieval society, but also serve as a brutal predictor of your family's political fortunes, marriage prospects, and economic survival in the years to come. What you expect to be a celebration will instead become a carefully orchestrated social examination where a single misstep in protocol or an unfavorable seating assignment could destroy relationships, ruin business arrangements, and condemn your family to social exile. The complexity of medieval wedding feast seating arrangements rivals that of modern diplomatic summits, with every placement carrying multiple layers of meaning that extend far beyond simple courtesy. As you approach the Great Hall, you observe the elaborate preparations that have transformed the normal dining space into a theater of social display. The high table sits elevated on a platform, creating a physical manifestation of the social hierarchy that governs every aspect of medieval life. The lord and lady of the castle occupy the center positions with the bride and groom beside them, but even these seemingly obvious placements have been negotiated for weeks in advance through a complex web of family alliances, political considerations, and economic arrangements. The church dignitary who will say, "Grace has been carefully selected not just for his religious authority, but for his political connections and ability to lend legitimacy to the unions being celebrated and the alliances being forged." His placement at the high table signals to everyone present which religious orders and political factions enjoy the favor of the hosting family, information that will influence business dealings, marriage negotiations, and political alignments for months or years to come. Every guest studies these arrangements with the intensity of scholars, reading the subtle messages conveyed by proximity to power and analyzing the implications for their own families' standing and future prospects. The two long tables extending perpendicular from the high table create additional layers of hierarchy that will determine not only your dining experience, but your social interactions, business opportunities, and marriage prospects throughout the celebration. The seating arrangement follows strict protocols based on noble rank, family connections, wealth, military service, church position, and a dozen other factors that must be weighed and balanced by experts in medieval social etiquette. Those seated closer to the high table enjoy not only better food service and more comfortable accommodations, but also greater access to important conversations, political negotiations, and social networking opportunities that could transform their lives. As you wait to be seated, you observe other guests engaging in the careful dance of social positioning that precedes every formal meal. Conversations become more guarded and formal as people assess their relative positions and adjust their behavior accordingly. Family representatives discreetly inquire about seating arrangements, trying to determine whether their placement reflects favorably on their status or signals some decline in their social standing. The tension in the air becomes palpable as people realize that their seats will serve as public announcements of their worth and position in the intricate web of medieval society. Your own seating assignment, when it finally comes, carries implications that extend far beyond the 3 days of celebration. If you find yourself seated close to the high table, you will be expected to comport yourself with the dignity and sophistication appropriate to such an honor, engaging in learned conversation, demonstrating your knowledge of courtly etiquette and proving yourself worthy of the distinction. Any failure in manners, any breach of protocol, any social misstep will be observed and remembered by everyone present, potentially damaging your reputation for years to come. The pressure to perform perfectly while navigating complex social and political undercurrents creates a stress that transforms celebration into ordeal. If your seating assignment places you far from the high table, the implications are equally challenging, but in different ways. A distant placement signals to everyone present that your family's influence has waned, your political connections have weakened, or your economic position has declined. Other guests will adjust their behavior toward you accordingly, treating you with less deference, excluding you from important conversations, and avoiding commitments that might tie their fortunes to your diminished prospects. The humiliation of such treatment, conducted publicly and over 3 days, can destroy years of careful relationship building and social positioning. The sharing arrangements mandated by medieval dining customs add another layer of complexity to the social dynamics at play. Those seated at lower positions must share trenchers, cups, and even eating utensils with their table companions, creating forced intimacies that can be either opportunities for alliance building or sources of profound discomfort and humiliation. The requirement that the lesser had to help the more important means that lower-ranked guests must serve their superiors by cutting meat, breaking bread, and passing cups, turning the dining experience into a public demonstration of subservience that reinforces social hierarchies with each course. The elaborate etiquette requirements that govern behavior at formal medieval dining create opportunities for both advancement and disaster that can transform lives in the span of a single meal. The extensive list of prohibited behaviors, no dipping meat in the salt dish, no leaning on the table, no stuffing the mouth, no burping, no staring about, creates a minefield of potential mistakes that could result in public embarrassment and long-lasting damage to your reputation. The pressure to maintain perfect decorum while navigating complex social dynamics, political undercurrents, and the physical challenges of medieval dining creates a state of constant anxiety that makes enjoyment impossible. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the growing realization that this seating arrangement will influence not just your experience at the wedding feast, but your family's prospects for years to come. The connections you make or fail to make, the impressions you create or destroy, and the political alignments you signal or damage during these 3 days will follow you long after the celebration ends. Marriage negotiations for your children, business partnerships, military alliances, and social advancement opportunities will all be influenced by how you perform during this seemingly festive but actually crucial political theatre. As you take your assigned seat and prepare for the first course, you understand with crystal clarity that you are not attending a party, but participating in a complex social examination where failure could destroy everything your family has worked to achieve. The first course arrives with all the ceremony and precision of a military operation, but you quickly discover that the elaborate presentation masks a brutal system of social control that will govern every aspect of your dining experience. For the next 3 days, the procession of servants bearing platters of bread, butter, wine, and ale follows strict protocols that reinforce the hierarchy established by the seating arrangements, with the finest foods and most attentive service directed toward the high table, while those seated farther away receive progressively less attention and lower quality provisions. This systematic differentiation in treatment serves as a constant reminder of your place in the social order and creates opportunities for both advancement and humiliation that will influence your family's fortunes long after the wedding celebration ends. Your table mates, selected not by friendship or compatibility, but by the rigid requirements of social ranking, present their own complex challenges that must be navigated with extraordinary care and diplomatic skill. The person seated to your right may be a political rival whose family has competed with yours for generations, while the person to your left might be someone whose support you desperately need for upcoming business ventures or marriage negotiations. Every conversation, every gesture, every response must be carefully calculated to avoid giving offense while advancing your family's interests, creating a state of constant mental exhaustion that makes genuine enjoyment impossible. The sharing of trenchers and cups, mandated by medieval dining customs, creates forced intimacies that can either forge valuable alliances or expose dangerous vulnerabilities in your social position. When you must share a bowl of soup with someone of higher rank, your every movement is scrutinized for signs of proper deference and respect. Any perceived slight, drinking before your superior, taking more than your fair share, or failing to serve their needs before your own, will be noted and remembered by everyone at the table. These seemingly minor interactions carry enormous weight in a society where reputation and honor determine everything from business success to marriage, prospects for your children. The conversation requirements at formal medieval dining create additional opportunities for both triumph and disaster that can transform your family's fortunes in unexpected ways. You must demonstrate not only your knowledge of current events, political developments, and social gossip, but also your ability to discuss these topics with the appropriate level of sophistication for your assigned social position. Speaking above your station risks being dismissed as presumptuous and ambitious beyond your worth, while failing to engage adequately suggests ignorance and lack of cultivation that marks you as unworthy of serious consideration for future partnerships or alliances. The elaborate etiquette rules that govern every aspect of formal dining become increasingly difficult to follow as the pressure and complexity of social navigation take their toll on your concentration and judgment. The requirement to maintain perfect posture while engaging in complex conversations about sensitive political topics creates physical tension that makes every movement feel awkward and unnatural. The need to monitor constantly the behavior of your superiors to ensure you respond appropriately to their cues adds another layer of stress that makes relaxation impossible and enjoyment a distant memory. As the courses progress, the differentiation in food quality and service becomes more pronounced, creating visible demonstrations of hierarchy that reinforce social boundaries and political realities. Those seated at the high table receive the choicest cuts of meat, the finest wines, and the most elaborate presentations, while those farther away must content themselves with lesser portions and simpler preparations. This systematic inequality in treatment serves not just as a practical matter of resource allocation, but as a deliberate reminder of social position that influences how everyone present perceives your worth and importance. The entertainment between courses provides additional opportunities for social advancement or humiliation that must be navigated with extraordinary care and strategic thinking. When minstrels perform love songs and epic tales, your responses and reactions are observed and interpreted as indicators of your cultural sophistication, political loyalties, and personal character. Appearing too moved by romantic ballads might suggest inappropriate sentimentality for someone of your station, while failing to respond adequately to heroic tales could indicate a lack of martial spirit or patriotic feeling that damages your reputation among military-minded nobles. The gift exchanges that occur during interludes between courses create complex webs of obligation and alliance that will influence relationships for years to come. The heirloom rings offered by the groom's female relatives to the bride, and the tokens of appreciation distributed by the wedding couple to their guests carry meanings that extend far beyond their material value. The manner in which these gifts are presented and received, the enthusiasm with which they are acknowledged, and the reciprocal gestures that are expected in return all become part of an elaborate diplomatic dance that can either strengthen or damage crucial relationships. The physical demands of maintaining proper dining posture and etiquette for hours at a time create additional challenges that test your endurance and self-control in ways that can influence others' perceptions of your character and breeding. The requirement to sit upright on uncomfortable benches or stools while engaging in complex social navigation, eating unfamiliar foods with primitive utensils, and drinking carefully measured amounts of wine creates physical stress that makes mental clarity increasingly difficult to maintain. Any visible signs of discomfort, fatigue, or difficulty handling the requirements of formal dining mark you as lacking the refinement and endurance expected of your social position. But perhaps most challenging of all is the growing awareness that every interaction, every response, every gesture is being evaluated not just by your immediate table companions, but by representatives of dozens of families whose decisions about future alliances, business partnerships, and marriage negotiations will be influenced by your performance during this extended social examination. The knowledge that your children's marriage prospects, your family's business opportunities, and your political standing for years to come depend on how successfully you navigate these 3 days of social theatre creates a level of pressure that transforms what should be celebration into an endurance test of diplomatic skill and social sophistication. The third day of the wedding feast brings with it the most elaborate and politically charged ceremonies, where the cumulative effects of 3 days of social positioning reach their climax in rituals that will determine alliances, influence marriage negotiations, and establish political relationships for decades to come. Your performance during these final hours will either consolidate the gains you've made through careful navigation of the complex social landscape, or destroy everything you've worked to achieve through a single misstep in the intricate dance of medieval diplomacy. The pressure reaches unbearable levels as you realize that this final day represents not just the conclusion of a celebration, but the moment when crucial decisions about your family's future will be made based on impressions formed and relationships forged during these 72 hours of social theatre. The traditional bedding ceremony, perhaps the most intimate and politically significant ritual of medieval wedding celebrations, transforms what modern sensibilities would consider a private moment into a public display of family alliances and social hierarchies that carries profound implications for everyone present. As friends and family members escort the bride and groom to their antechambers, the selection of who participates in this honor reveals crucial information about family relationships, political alliances, and social standings that will influence business dealings and marriage negotiations for years to come. Your inclusion or exclusion from the inner circle, allowed to witness the preparation of the nuptial bed and the blessing of the union, becomes a public statement about your family's importance and trustworthiness that everyone present will note and remember. If you are chosen to participate in decorating the marriage bed with rose petals or witnessing the priest's blessing ceremony, your elevated status is confirmed for all to see, opening doors for future collaborations and strengthening your position in ongoing negotiations. However, if you find yourself excluded from these intimate ceremonies, your diminished standing becomes equally apparent, potentially damaging relationships and limiting opportunities that might have been available to your family. The crowding of friends and family into the bedroom for the final blessing ceremony creates an atmosphere of forced intimacy that tests diplomatic skills and social endurance in ways that can make or break crucial relationships. In the confined space, traditional hierarchies become temporarily suspended, creating opportunities for both advancement and disaster as people navigate proximity to their superiors and inferiors without the normal physical boundaries that typically reinforce social order. Conversations that might be impossible in formal settings become feasible, but the pressure to make favorable impressions while respecting complex protocols of precedence creates stress that makes meaningful connection nearly impossible. The priest's ceremony ensuring fertility and blessings upon the union provides the final opportunity for public display of religious devotion political loyalty, and social sophistication that will influence how others perceive your family's character and reliability for years to come. Your participation in the prayers, your responses to the blessing, and your demeanor during this sacred moment all become indicators of your spiritual worthiness and moral character that will be factored into future decisions about business partnerships, marriage alliances, and social inclusion. Any perceived lack of appropriate reverence or enthusiasm could mark your family as unreliable or potentially heretical, creating obstacles that could persist for generations. As the 3-day celebration draws to its conclusion, the accumulated weight of countless small interactions, carefully observed behaviors, and strategic positioning begins to crystallize into concrete outcomes that will shape your family's fortunes for years to come. The subtle negotiations that have been conducted through seating arrangements, conversation topics, gift exchanges, and ceremonial participation now translate into tangible agreements, partnership proposals, and marriage discussions that will determine your family's trajectory for decades to come. Those who have successfully navigated the complex social terrain find themselves with new opportunities for advancement, while those who have misjudged the political undercurrents or violated unspoken protocols discover that doors previously open to them have quietly closed. The final toast and ceremonial conclusion of the feast provides one last opportunity for social positioning that can either confirm your successful navigation of the 3-day ordeal or expose fatal miscalculations in your diplomatic strategy. The order in which toasts are offered, the enthusiasm with which they are received, and the reciprocal acknowledgements that follow all carry meaning that extends far beyond the immediate moment. Your position in these final ceremonies serves as a public summary of your performance throughout the celebration, influencing how others will remember and discuss your family's behavior long after the wedding guests have returned to their homes. The exchange of final gifts and tokens of appreciation during the concluding ceremonies creates lasting obligations and expectations that will influence relationships for years to come. The quality and appropriateness of gifts you offer, the graciousness with which you receive tokens from others, and the promises of future support or collaboration that are embedded in these exchanges all become part of the complex web of medieval diplomacy that governs everything from trade relationships to military alliances. Any miscalculation in these final exchanges can undo 3 days of careful relationship building and leave your family worse positioned than when the celebration began. As the great hall begins to empty and guests prepare for their journeys home, the full scope of what you have endured becomes clear in all its complexity and consequence. What appeared to be a simple wedding celebration has revealed itself as an elaborate examination of your family's political acumen, social sophistication, and diplomatic skill. Every conversation, every gesture, every response has been evaluated and interpreted as evidence of your worth as potential allies, business partners, or marriage connections. The exhaustion you feel comes not just from 3 days of formal dining and social performance, but from the constant mental effort required to navigate successfully through a minefield of potential mistakes and missed opportunities. The carriage ride home provides your first opportunity in 3 days to relax your guard and consider honestly the implications of your performance during this medieval social marathon. As you review the conversations, connections, and impressions created during the celebration, you begin to understand the true cost of participation in such events, the physical demands of formal dining, the mental strain of constant diplomatic calculation, and the emotional pressure of knowing that your family's future depends on your social performance create a level of stress that makes the supposed pleasure of celebration into an ordeal that tests human endurance to its limits. The letters and messages that will arrive in the weeks following the wedding will reveal the true consequences of your 3-day performance as families begin to act on the impressions formed and relationships established during the celebration. Marriage proposals for your children, invitations to participate in business ventures, requests for political support, and social inclusions or exclusions will all flow from the complex web of interactions that occurred during those 72 hours of medieval social theatre. The knowledge that so much of your family's future has been determined by your ability to navigate successfully through an impossibly complex social maze creates a lingering anxiety that persists long after the immediate celebration has ended. But perhaps most disturbing of all is the realization that this elaborate ordeal is not an exceptional event, but a regular feature of medieval social life that must be endured repeatedly throughout your lifetime. Every major celebration, every political gathering, every significant social event will present similar challenges and carry similar consequences for your family's fortunes. The skills required to survive and thrive in such environments must be constantly maintained and refined, creating a perpetual state of social vigilance that makes genuine relaxation and enjoyment increasingly rare and precious commodities in the complex world of medieval society. You enter the great hall of the medieval wedding feast with the reasonable expectation that the food, at least, will provide some pleasure amid the social complexities and political maneuvering that characterize such celebrations. But you are about to discover that medieval dining presents health risks and gastronomic challenges that transform every meal into a potential encounter with disease, poisoning, and digestive disasters that could leave you bedridden for weeks or permanently damage your health. The elaborate dishes being prepared in primitive kitchens under appalling sanitary conditions carry dangers that extend far beyond simple indigestion, threatening your life in ways that would horrify modern diners but were accepted as normal. Risks in an age when understanding of food safety, disease transmission, and basic hygiene remains centuries away from development. The first course arrives with great ceremony, but your initial bite reveals the harsh reality that medieval food preparation operates under conditions that virtually guarantee contamination, spoilage, and the presence of harmful bacteria that can cause illness ranging from mild discomfort to fatal poisoning. The bread, which should represent the safest component of the meal, carries its own risks from grain storage in damp conditions that promote mold growth, including the deadly ergot fungus that causes St. Anthony's fire, a condition that produces hallucinations, convulsions, and painful burning sensations in the extremities that can lead to gangrene and death. The seemingly innocent act of breaking bread becomes an exercise in biological roulette, where each bite might contain the seeds of serious illness. The meat dishes, which form the centerpiece of medieval celebration dining, present even more serious health hazards due to the primitive preservation methods, inadequate cooking temperatures, and complete lack of understanding about bacterial contamination that characterizes food preparation in this era. The roasted meats that arrive at your table have been handled by dozens of servants working under conditions that would violate every modern food safety regulation, their hands unwashed except for perfunctory rinses in basins of water that quickly become contaminated themselves. The elaborate presentations that require extensive handling and decoration during preparation create multiple opportunities for contamination that increase exponentially as the celebration progresses and exhausted servants make increasingly frequent mistakes in basic hygiene procedures. The shared eating arrangements mandated by medieval dining customs create perfect conditions for disease transmission that turn every meal into a potential epidemic event. The requirement to share trenchers, cups, and eating utensils with your table companions means that any illness carried by one person quickly spreads to everyone in the immediate vicinity. The communal serving dishes from which multiple diners help themselves using their fingers or shared implements become breeding grounds for bacteria and viruses that can cause dysentery, typhoid fever, and other waterborne diseases that were common killers in medieval times. The primitive understanding of food temperature control creates additional hazards, as dishes sit for extended periods at temperatures that promote bacterial growth, while servants attend to the complex choreography required for formal medieval dining. The elaborate multi-course structure of wedding feasts means that foods prepared hours earlier must be kept warm through methods that actually encourage spoilage, while the theatrical presentations require that dishes be assembled and decorated long before serving, providing ample time for harmful bacteria to multiply to dangerous levels. The pressure to maintain visual appeal often takes precedence over food safety, resulting in dishes that look magnificent but harbor invisible threats to everyone who consumes them. The water used in food preparation presents its own category of health risks that compound the dangers already present in the raw ingredients and cooking processes. Medieval water sources are frequently contaminated with human and animal waste due to primitive sanitation systems that cannot handle the volume of waste generated by large gatherings like wedding celebrations. The wells, streams, and cisterns that supply water for cooking often serve multiple purposes, including waste disposal, creating a cycle of contamination that makes every dish prepared with such water a potential source of cholera, dysentery, and other waterborne diseases that can kill healthy adults within days of infection. The spices and seasonings that characterize elaborate medieval cuisine, while serving partly to mask the taste of spoiled ingredients, also create their own health hazards through adulteration, contamination, and the use of substances that are actively toxic in the quantities typical of wedding feast preparation. Many spices arrive after months of transport under conditions that promote spoilage and contamination, while others are deliberately adulterated with cheaper substitutes that may include toxic substances used to achieve similar colors or flavors. The extensive use of salt for preservation creates additional health risks for diners whose bodies are not adapted to such high sodium intake, potentially causing dangerous spikes in blood pressure and other cardiovascular complications. The wine, an ale that flow freely throughout medieval wedding celebrations, present their own complex array of health risks that extend beyond simple intoxication to include serious poisoning from contaminated brewing ingredients, toxic additives used to enhance flavor or appearance, and the consumption of alcohol that has turned to vinegar or become infected with harmful bacteria during storage in primitive containers. The pressure to provide impressive quantities of alcoholic beverages for 3 days of celebration often leads to the use of older or questionable supplies that would normally be discarded, creating situations where guests unknowingly consume beverages that pose serious health risks. The dairy products featured in many wedding feast dishes carry particularly high risks of contamination and spoilage due to the complete absence of pasteurization and the primitive methods used for storage and transport in an era before refrigeration. Cheese, milk, and butter products can harbor dangerous bacteria that cause severe food poisoning, while the extended storage required for wedding feast preparation virtually guarantees that these products will be consumed long past their safe consumption period. The rich sauces and cream-based preparations that characterize elaborate medieval cuisine often combine multiple contaminated ingredients in ways that amplify the health risks while masking the visual and aromatic signs of spoilage that might otherwise warn diners of danger. As you work your way through the first course, the combination of questionable ingredients, primitive preparation methods, contaminated serving conditions, and the pressure to consume foods that taste increasingly suspicious creates a growing sense of unease that has nothing to do with social anxiety and everything to do with the very real possibility that this celebration meal might result in serious illness or death. The knowledge that medieval medical treatment for food poisoning consists primarily of bloodletting, purging, and prayer makes the decision of whether to continue eating and exercise in risk assessment that adds a layer of dread to what should be a joyous occasion. The second day of the wedding feast brings with it a fresh array of culinary hazards as the kitchen staff now operating under conditions of extreme exhaustion and stress make increasingly frequent mistakes in food handling, preparation, and presentation that multiply the health risks already inherent in medieval dining to levels that would be considered criminally negligent by any modern standard. The cumulative effects of inadequate sanitation, primitive food preservation, and the pressure to maintain elaborate presentations despite deteriorating working conditions create a perfect storm of contamination possibilities that transform every dish into a potential instrument of illness or death. The fish courses that traditionally feature prominently on the second day of wedding celebrations present particularly acute health risks due to the difficulty of determining freshness in an era without refrigeration and the complex preparation methods that provide multiple opportunities for contamination during handling, cleaning, and cooking. The eel, tench, and tuna that arrive at your table have traveled unknown distances under conditions that may have allowed spoilage to begin long before they reached the castle kitchens, while the elaborate sauces and preparations used to enhance their flavor often serve the dual purpose of masking the taste and smell of fish that has already begun to decompose. The stuffed chickens and elaborate poultry preparations that characterize the second day's menu require extensive handling by kitchen servants whose understanding of cross-contamination prevention extends only to the most basic concepts of cleanliness, creating situations where harmful bacteria from one source can contaminate multiple dishes through the use of shared cutting surfaces, utensils, and preparation areas. The complex stuffing mixtures that fill these birds often combine multiple ingredients that have been prepared at different times and stored under varying conditions, creating combinations that may be individually safe but become dangerous when mixed together and cooked at temperatures that may be inadequate to kill all harmful bacteria present in the final product. The pottages and soups that serve as fundamental components of medieval dining present their own category of health risks, as ingredients of questionable quality are combined in large cauldrons where temperatures may be inadequate to ensure safety, while the constant stirring and tasting required for proper preparation create multiple opportunities for contamination from the hands and mouths of exhausted servants who may be carrying communicable diseases. The practice of keeping these dishes warm for hours before serving provides ideal conditions for bacterial growth, while the communal serving methods ensure that any contamination present in the pot will be distributed to every diner who partakes of these supposedly nourishing preparations. The increasing complexity of the second day's presentations requires more extensive handling and decoration of foods by servants whose judgment and attention to detail are compromised by exhaustion, stress, and the physical demands of working in the hellish conditions of medieval kitchens during a major celebration. The elaborate garnishes, artistic arrangements, and decorative elements that characterize formal wedding feast presentations require extensive touching and manipulation of foods that will be consumed raw, creating opportunities for contamination that multiply as tired servants make increasingly frequent mistakes in basic hygiene procedures while struggling to meet impossible demands for perfection under deteriorating working conditions. The wine and ale consumption that has been building throughout the celebration begins to take its toll on diners' judgment and physical coordination, making them more likely to consume questionable foods without proper evaluation and less capable of recognizing the warning signs of spoilage or contamination that might otherwise protect them from serious illness. The social pressure to continue drinking and eating despite growing physical discomfort creates situations where people ignore their body's natural warning systems and consume foods and beverages that pose serious health risks in order to maintain social appearances and avoid giving offense to their hosts. The primitive sanitation facilities of medieval castles become increasingly inadequate as the celebration progresses and larger numbers of people stress systems that were barely adequate. Under normal circumstances, creating situations where human waste contaminates water supplies, cooking areas, and food storage spaces in ways that exponentially increase the health risks associated with every meal served during the extended celebration. The accumulation of garbage, food scraps, and organic waste in and around the kitchen areas creates breeding grounds for vermin and insects that serve as vectors for disease transmission, while the primitive waste disposal methods ensure that contamination spreads throughout the castle environment in ways that affect every aspect of food, preparation, and service. The increasing desperation of kitchen staff to maintain quality and presentation standards despite deteriorating ingredients and impossible working conditions leads to the use of techniques and ingredients that might normally be avoided, including the masking of spoiled flavors with excessive spices, the serving of foods that have been stored too long, and the reuse of ingredients that should have been discarded for safety reasons. The pressure to avoid waste during such an expensive celebration overrides normal caution about food safety, creating situations where economic considerations take precedence over health concerns in ways that multiply the risks for every person. Consuming the elaborate meals, the cumulative effects of poor food quality, contaminated preparation conditions, and the physical stress of multi-day celebration begin to manifest in your body as digestive discomfort, nausea, and other early warning signs of food-related illness that force you to confront the reality that continuing to participate in this feast may result in serious health consequences that could affect you for weeks or months to come. The knowledge that medieval medical treatment for digestive ailments consists primarily of bloodletting, purging with dangerous substances, and prayers for divine intervention makes the decision of whether to continue eating an increasingly urgent question of survival rather than social obligation. As the second day draws to a close, you find yourself caught between the social necessity of participating in the celebration and the growing certainty that the food being served poses genuine threats to your health and possibly your life, creating a dilemma that epitomizes the complex and often dangerous realities of medieval social life, where survival requires constantly balancing competing risks and making decisions that could have consequences lasting far beyond the immediate situation. The third and final day of the wedding feast presents the most elaborate and dangerous culinary challenges as kitchen servants, now operating at the absolute limits of human endurance, prepare the most complex dishes under conditions that have deteriorated beyond any reasonable standard of safety, creating a perfect storm of contamination, spoilage, and food preparation disasters that transform the celebration's culmination into a gastronomic nightmare where every bite represents a calculated risk with potentially fatal consequences. The traditional requirement that the final day surpass all previous presentations in complexity and refinement creates impossible demands that virtually guarantee the use of questionable ingredients, dangerous preparation shortcuts, and presentation methods that prioritize appearance over safety in ways that multiply the health risks exponentially. The candied fruits and elaborate sugar work that characterize the final day's presentations require ingredients and preparation methods that are particularly susceptible to contamination and spoilage, as the complex processes involved in creating these delicacies provide multiple opportunities for the introduction of harmful bacteria, while the high sugar content, rather than providing preservation as intended, often creates ideal breeding conditions for dangerous microorganisms when combined with the primitive storage and handling methods available in medieval kitchens. The extended preparation times required for these elaborate confections mean that they must be started days in advance under conditions that cannot maintain proper temperature control, while the extensive handling required for decoration and presentation ensures that contamination from human contact becomes virtually inevitable. The pressure to create memorable final presentations leads to the use of exotic ingredients and experimental preparation methods that push medieval cooking techniques far beyond their safe limits, resulting in dishes that may look spectacular but contain combinations of ingredients that have never been tested for safety or compatibility. The competitive atmosphere among kitchen staff to create the most impressive displays often results in the use of substances that are decorative but potentially toxic, including metallic dusts, exotic spices of unknown origin, and preserved ingredients that may have been treated with substances that are harmful to human consumption but were considered acceptable for their preservative or aesthetic properties. The waste management crisis that has been building throughout the three-day celebration reaches critical proportions on the final day, as the accumulated refuse from intensive food preparation overwhelms the primitive disposal systems of the medieval castle, creating conditions where food waste, human waste, and animal waste intermingle in ways that contaminate water supplies, cooking surfaces, and ingredients storage areas with a toxic mixture of bacteria, parasites, and disease-causing organisms that make every subsequent meal, preparation, an exercise in biological warfare against the diners who will consume the final products. The physical condition of the kitchen servants who prepare the final day's meals has deteriorated to levels that compromise their ability to maintain even the minimal hygiene standards typically observed in medieval food preparation, as exhaustion, injuries, and the onset of illness from their own exposure to contaminated conditions create situations where people who are actively sick continue to handle food that will be served to guests, spreading communicable diseases through direct contact, while their impaired judgment leads to increasingly frequent violations of basic food safety procedures that multiply the contamination risks with each dish prepared. The final ceremonial presentations require coordination between kitchen staff and serving personnel that breaks down under the extreme stress and exhaustion of the three-day marathon, resulting in delays, mistakes, and improvisations that compromise food safety as dishes sit at dangerous temperatures for extended periods. While problems are resolved, servants handle foods inappropriately while struggling to maintain elaborate presentations, and the normal safeguards that might prevent contamination are abandoned in favor of simply getting the food to the table before complete disaster strikes the entire operation. The accumulated effects of 3 days of questionable food consumption begin to manifest in serious digestive distress, nausea, fever, and other symptoms that signal the onset of food-related illness among the guests, creating a situation where people who are becoming actively sick continue to share utensils, trenchers, and serving dishes with others in ways that accelerate the spread of foodborne diseases throughout the entire gathering. The social pressure to maintain appearances and continue participating in the celebration despite obvious physical distress ensures that sick individuals remain in close contact with healthy guests, creating ideal conditions for epidemic outbreaks of dysentery, typhoid, and other serious diseases that can kill otherwise healthy adults within days of infection. The final toasts and ceremonial consumption of special wines and liquors create additional opportunities for mass poisoning, as these beverages, prepared specifically for the occasion using methods and ingredients that may not have been properly tested, are consumed simultaneously by large numbers of people who have no way to evaluate their safety or quality. The practice of sharing ceremonial cups among multiple drinkers ensures that any contamination present in the beverages will be distributed widely among the guests, while the social obligation to participate fully in these final rituals prevents people from declining to drink substances that may pose serious health risks. The medical consequences of participating in a 3-day medieval wedding feast become undeniably apparent as the celebration concludes and guests begin to experience the full impact of sustained exposure to contaminated food, polluted water, and disease, carrying individuals in crowded, unsanitary conditions. The primitive state of medieval medicine means that treatment for food poisoning, dysentery, and other feast-related illnesses consists primarily of bloodletting, purging with toxic substances, and prayer, often causing more harm than the original conditions and frequently resulting in death from complications that would be easily treatable with modern medical intervention. As you prepare to depart from this medieval culinary nightmare, the full scope of what you have endured becomes clear in all its horrifying detail. What began as a celebration has revealed itself as a 3-day exposure to health risks that would be considered unacceptable in any modern context, where every meal represented a gamble with potentially fatal consequences and where the social obligations of participation required you to ignore your body's natural warning systems in favor of maintaining appearances that could literally cost you your life. The knowledge that such celebrations are regular features of medieval social was intended to celebrate and strengthen. The crowded, emotionally charged atmosphere of the bedding ceremony becomes a powder keg when filled with armed, drunk, and sexually aroused individuals whose normal social inhibitions have been destroyed by alcohol and whose capacity for appropriate behavior has been compromised beyond recognition. The political consequences of behavior during the final day's activities often prove more devastating than the immediate physical damage, as actions taken while severely intoxicated can destroy carefully negotiated alliances, ruin business relationships, and create family enemies that persist for generations, transforming what should be celebration into the source of conflicts that affect multiple families for decades to come. The permanent nature of political and social damage contrasts sharply with the temporary nature of alcohol's effects, creating situations where a few hours of impaired judgment can undo years of careful relationship building and diplomatic positioning. The SIBA medical emergencies that inevitably result from 3 days of sustained alcohol abuse overwhelm the primitive healthcare resources available in medieval settings, as cases of alcohol poisoning, severe dehydration, and alcohol-related injuries accumulate faster than they can be treated using methods that consist primarily of bloodletting, purging, and prayer. The complete absence of modern medical understanding about alcohol's effects on human physiology means that treatment often worsens conditions rather than improving them, while the social stigma associated with admitting inability to handle alcohol prevents many people from seeking help even when their lives are in immediate danger. The violence that erupts during the final day's activities often proves more deadly than earlier conflicts because participants have lost the physical coordination necessary to defend themselves effectively while retaining access to weapons and the emotional volatility that makes conflict inevitable in highly charged social situations. The combination of impaired reflexes, compromised judgment, and easily accessible weapons creates conditions where minor disputes can quickly escalate into deadly encounters that claim multiple lives and create lasting trauma for survivors who must live with the consequences of actions taken while their moral and intellectual faculties were completely compromised by alcohol. The cleanup and aftermath of medieval wedding celebrations reveal the true cost of such elaborate drinking rituals, as families count the dead and injured, assess the political damage from drunken behavior, and attempt to repair relationships destroyed by alcohol-fueled conflicts that could have been avoided entirely if medieval society possessed any understanding of responsible alcohol consumption or effective intervention strategies for dangerous intoxication. The normalization of such outcomes as acceptable costs of celebration perpetuates a cycle of alcohol-related violence and tragedy that makes medieval social life far more dangerous and unpredictable than necessary. As you somehow survive this 3-day descent into medieval drinking hell and begin the long process of physical and social recovery from an experience that has damaged your health, compromised your relationships, and exposed you to dangers that could easily have resulted in death or permanent disability, you finally understand why wise individuals often avoid major celebrations entirely or participate only minimally in the drinking customs that transform joyous occasions into nightmarish ordeals where survival depends more on luck than skill, and where the supposed pleasures of alcohol consumption are far outweighed by the very real risks of violence, accident, poisoning, and social disaster that make medieval wedding feasts among the most dangerous social events that civilized humans have ever devised. You raise your first cup of ale on the opening day of the medieval wedding feast, believing that alcohol will provide welcome relief from the social tensions and elaborate protocols that govern such celebrations. But you are about to discover that medieval drinking customs transform what should be convivial enjoyment into a systematic assault on human judgment, physical coordination, and social restraint that creates cascading disasters affecting everyone present. The ale, flowing freely from enormous barrels, carries dangers that extend far beyond simple intoxication, as medieval brewing methods operate without any understanding of alcohol content, standardization, bacterial contamination, or the toxic effects of additives used to enhance flavor, preserve freshness, or stretch limited supplies during extended celebrations. Reddit. The social pressure to participate fully in drinking rituals creates an immediate dilemma that will plague you throughout the 3-day celebration, as refusing toasts signals disrespect to hosts and fellow guests, while attempting to moderate consumption marks you as weak, antisocial, or potentially untrustworthy in a culture where shared drinking serves as both entertainment and diplomatic tool. Your table companions expect you to match their consumption levels during ceremonial toasts, participate enthusiastically in drinking games, and demonstrate your capacity for alcohol as evidence of your character, breeding, and commitment to the celebration, creating situations where prudent individuals must choose between maintaining important relationships and protecting their health and safety. The medieval understanding of alcohol's effects on human behavior remains primitive at best, with drunkenness viewed primarily as evidence of celebration enthusiasm rather than a dangerous medical condition that compromises judgment, coordination, and impulse control in ways that create serious risks for everyone present. The 3-day duration of wedding celebrations virtually guarantees that participants will experience cumulative effects of sustained alcohol consumption that build upon each other in dangerous ways, as your body struggles to process increasing quantities of alcohol while simultaneously dealing with sleep deprivation, stress, and the physical demands of extended social performance under challenging conditions. The quality and safety of medieval alcoholic beverages present their own catalogue of health hazards that compound the dangers of excessive consumption, as brewing methods lacking any quality control or contamination prevention create products that may contain dangerous bacteria, toxic fermentation byproducts, or adulterants added to enhance intoxicating effects or extend limited supplies. The pressure to provide impressive quantities of alcohol for 3 days of celebration often results in the use of older stocks that have begun deteriorating, newer brews that haven't properly fermented, or beverages adulterated with substances that can cause serious poisoning even in moderate amounts. The entertainment provided between courses creates additional hazards as alcohol consumption progresses and guests participate in activities requiring coordination, timing, and good judgment that become increasingly compromised with each round of drinks. The traditional dancing, singing, and musical performances that accompany medieval celebrations become dangerous when attempted by intoxicated individuals who lack the physical control necessary to avoid accidents, while competitive games and contests escalate into serious conflicts when participants lose the emotional restraint necessary for friendly competition and begin treating entertainment as matters of personal honor, requiring violent resolution. The weapons that medieval guests routinely carry as symbols of status create a volatile combination when mixed with alcohol consumption and the competitive atmosphere that characterizes wedding celebrations, as minor disagreements over precedence, perceived slights during social interactions, or disputes arising from games and entertainment can quickly escalate into armed conflicts when participants lack the judgment necessary to resolve differences peacefully. The social hierarchy tensions that simmer beneath the surface of medieval gatherings become explosive when alcohol removes the diplomatic restraints that normally prevent open conflict between competing families, political factions, and economic rivals forced to share close quarters during extended celebrations. The castle's physical environment presents additional dangers for intoxicated guests who must navigate dark corridors, steep stone staircases, and unfamiliar layouts while severely impaired, creating opportunities for falls, accidents, and injuries that can prove fatal in an era when medical treatment consists primarily of crude surgical techniques, bloodletting, and herbal remedies that often cause more harm than the original injuries. The practice of sharing sleeping quarters with multiple guests creates situations where conflicts between intoxicated individuals can escalate quickly in cramped private spaces, where intervention becomes impossible and weapons remain easily accessible, even during supposedly peaceful rest periods. The eating requirements that accompany drinking create their own problems, as alcohol consumption reduces appetite for food while increasing consumption of beverages, leading to dangerous levels of intoxication on empty stomachs that accelerate alcohol absorption and intensify impairment effects. The rich, heavily spiced foods served at wedding feasts can interact unpredictably with alcohol to cause nausea, digestive distress, and altered absorption rates that make it impossible to gauge safe consumption levels, while the social pressure to continue eating and drinking despite obvious physical discomfort creates situations where guests ignore their body's warning signals and continue consuming dangerous combinations of food and alcohol. The political implications of drinking behavior add another layer of complexity to alcohol consumption decisions, as your performance during drinking rituals communicates important information about your character, reliability, and suitability as ally or business partner to families whose support may be crucial for your future prosperity. Drinking too little suggests weakness or lack of commitment to shared celebration, while drinking too much risks embarrassing behavior that could damage carefully cultivated relationships and destroy years of diplomatic positioning, creating a narrow range of acceptable consumption that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain as alcohol impairs the very judgment necessary for navigating these complex social requirements. As the first day of celebration progresses and you feel alcohol's effects beginning to compromise your physical coordination, mental clarity, and emotional control, you start to understand that the remaining 2 days will present escalating challenges that test not only your capacity for sustained drinking, but your ability to survive in an environment where intoxication, social competition, and potential violence combine to create conditions where a single moment of impaired judgment could result in injury, death, or social disaster that destroys everything your family has worked to achieve through participation in this increasingly dangerous medieval celebration. The second day dawns with your head pounding from the previous evening's alcohol consumption. But medieval celebration customs allow no recovery time, as ceremonial morning toasts immediately resume the drinking that will continue relentlessly throughout another 16 hours of festivities, building upon the alcohol still circulating in your bloodstream to create cumulative intoxication effects that push your body's processing capacity far beyond safe limits, while your compromised judgment makes it increasingly difficult to recognize the mounting dangers surrounding you. The breakfast ales and morning wines contain alcohol concentrations that vary wildly due to primitive brewing methods, meaning you may unknowingly consume beverages much stronger than anticipated, accelerating your intoxication to dangerous levels before realizing the extent of your impairment. Rancor. The social dynamics among wedding guests become increasingly volatile as sustained alcohol consumption breaks down the careful diplomatic protocols that allow diverse and often hostile groups to coexist peacefully during formal gatherings, with long-standing grudges, family rivalries, and political disputes beginning to surface as alcohol lowers inhibitions and compromises the judgment necessary for maintaining delicate social peace. Conversations that begin as polite exchanges rapidly deteriorate into heated arguments, as intoxicated participants lose the emotional control required for diplomatic discourse, while the competitive atmosphere of medieval celebration transforms minor social friction into major conflicts that threaten to explode into violence at any moment. The entertainment scheduled for the second day becomes progressively more dangerous as heavily intoxicated guests attempt activities requiring coordination, balance, and timing that alcohol has systematically destroyed, resulting in accidents during dancing that send people tumbling into hearth fires, injuries during competitive games that escalate beyond friendly contest into serious violence, and mishaps during musical performances that create conflicts between entertainers and audience members who have lost all capacity for appropriate social interaction. The traditional sword dances and martial demonstrations that often accompany medieval wedding celebrations become particularly hazardous when performed by or near heavily intoxicated individuals whose reflexes and judgment have been compromised to dangerous levels. The weapons carried by guests as symbols of their status and military service create an increasingly explosive situation as alcohol consumption impairs the judgment and impulse control necessary for responsible handling of dangerous implements, transforming minor social conflicts into potentially deadly encounters when participants lack the mental capacity to resolve disputes through civilized means. The combination of alcohol, easily accessible weapons, social competition, and political tensions creates a volatile mixture requiring only a minor spark to ignite violence that can spread rapidly through the entire gathering, resulting in injuries or deaths that transform celebration into tragedy and create lasting enmities between families whose conflicts began over trivial matters magnified by drink. The primitive medical understanding of alcohol's effects means that dangerous levels of intoxication are dismissed as normal celebration enthusiasm rather than recognized as serious medical emergencies requiring immediate intervention, allowing guests to continue drinking long past the point where their consumption becomes life-threatening. Cases of alcohol poisoning manifest as violent illness, loss of consciousness, and behavioral changes that endanger everyone present. But the medieval interpretation of these symptoms as temporary conditions rather than medical crises means that dangerously intoxicated individuals continue participating in activities despite being in potentially fatal conditions requiring treatment unavailable in medieval settings. The physical logistics of managing large numbers of heavily intoxicated guests create additional hazards as people struggle to navigate the castle's dark corridors, steep stone staircases, and unfamiliar architecture while severely impaired, resulting in falls that cause serious injuries or death in an environment where medical care consists primarily of crude bandaging and prayer. The sharing of sleeping quarters with multiple guests creates opportunities for conflicts between intoxicated individuals to escalate in private spaces where intervention becomes impossible and access to weapons remains unrestricted, while the altered judgment and reduced inhibitions caused by alcohol increase the likelihood of inappropriate behavior that can destroy the very relationships the wedding celebration was intended to strengthen. The escalating consumption requirements needed to maintain social standing and participate fully in the second day's activities push many guests beyond their physical capacity for processing alcohol safely, creating a cascade of medical emergencies as people experience severe dehydration, nutritional deficiencies from replacing food with alcohol, and digestive problems that compromise their body's ability to handle additional consumption. The social pressure to continue drinking despite obvious physical distress creates situations where guests ignore clear warning signs of alcohol poisoning and continue consuming dangerous quantities of beverages their bodies can no longer process. Effectively, while the competitive atmosphere encourages even greater consumption as people attempt to demonstrate their capacity for alcohol as evidence of their strength and character. the waste management problems that plague medieval celebrations become exponentially worse as intoxicated guests lose control of basic bodily functions, creating unsanitary conditions that increase disease transmission risks while adding to the overwhelming sensory assault of smoke, food odors, and human waste that makes the celebration environment increasingly unbearable for anyone retaining enough sobriety to notice the deteriorating conditions. The primitive sanitation systems designed for normal castle operations cannot handle the volume and intensity of waste generated by hundreds of heavily intoxicated guests, creating health hazards that affect everyone present regardless of their individual consumption levels. The political and economic pressures driving extended wedding celebrations create incentives for hosts to encourage maximum alcohol consumption regardless of guest safety, as the quantity and quality of beverages provided serves as a measure of wealth and generosity that influences future political relationships and business opportunities. The competitive atmosphere among guests to demonstrate drinking capacity becomes a matter of personal and family honor that overrides health considerations, creating situations where individuals accept potentially fatal risks rather than appear weak to important allies and business partners whose support determines their family's future prosperity and social standing in the complex web of medieval political relationships. As the second day draws to a close and you assess the mounting physical damage from sustained drinking, while recognizing that tomorrow's requirements will be even more demanding, you begin to understand that survival of this medieval celebration depends not on your capacity for alcohol, but on your ability to navigate an increasingly dangerous environment where intoxication, violence, and social desperation combine to strip away civilized behavior and reveal the brutal realities lurking beneath the elaborate courtesies that normally govern medieval social interaction, leaving you to face one final day of this alcoholic nightmare with diminished resources and escalating dangers. The third and final day arrives with your body pushed far beyond its capacity to process alcohol safely, yet medieval tradition demands the heaviest drinking of the entire celebration, as elaborate ceremonies, final toasts, and ritual consumption of special beverages create a gauntlet of obligatory alcohol consumption that allows no opportunity for recovery from the previous day's systematic destruction of your physical health and mental capacity. The special wines and liquors prepared specifically for the wedding's conclusion often contain higher alcohol concentrations than the already dangerous daily fare, while their ceremonial significance creates social pressure to consume quantities that exceed any reasonable limits in order to demonstrate proper respect for the occasion and maintain crucial political relationships that determine your family's future prospects. Reddit. The accumulated effects of sleep deprivation, nutritional deficiencies, and sustained alcohol abuse combine to create a perfect storm of impaired judgment, compromised coordination, and eliminated impulse control that makes every interaction potentially explosive and every activity potentially fatal, as guests who have managed to survive 2 days of this ordeal now face the most challenging requirements precisely when their capacity to meet those challenges has been most severely damaged. Your vision blurs from alcohol and exhaustion, your hands shake uncontrollably, and your ability to process information and make decisions has deteriorated to levels that make even basic social interaction dangerous. Yet the celebration's climactic activities require precisely the physical coordination and mental acuity that extended drinking has systematically destroyed. The traditional entertainment and ceremonies scheduled for the final day become death traps when attempted by heavily intoxicated individuals whose reflexes, balance, and decision-making abilities have been obliterated by sustained alcohol abuse, resulting in horrific accidents during dancing that send people into fires or down staircases, severe injuries during competitive games that escalate into deadly violence, and disasters during ceremonial activities that create conflicts capable of igniting family feuds lasting generations. The sword dances, martial demonstrations, and athletic contests marking the celebration's climax require precisely the capabilities that 3 days of drinking have eliminated, transforming traditional activities into Russian roulette for participants and spectators alike. The bedding ceremony that traditionally concludes medieval wedding celebrations creates additional opportunities for disaster as heavily intoxicated guests participate in intimate rituals requiring social sensitivity, physical coordination, and emotional restraint that alcohol has completely eliminated, resulting in sexual violence, inappropriate behavior, and conflicts that destroy the very relationships and alliances the wedding was intended to celebrate and strengthen. The crowded, emotionally charged atmosphere becomes a powder keg when filled with armed, drunk, and sexually aroused individuals whose normal social inhibitions have been destroyed by alcohol and whose capacity for appropriate behavior has been compromised beyond recognition, creating conditions where traditional ceremonies become opportunities for assault, rape, and violence that traumatize victims and create lasting enmities between families. The medical emergencies that inevitably result from 3 days of sustained alcohol abuse overwhelm the primitive healthcare resources available in medieval settings, as cases of alcohol poisoning, severe dehydration, liver failure, and alcohol-related injuries accumulate faster than they can be treated using methods consisting primarily of bloodletting, purging with toxic substances, and prayer that often worsen conditions rather than improving them. The complete absence of modern medical understanding about alcohol's effects on human physiology means that well-intentioned treatment frequently proves more deadly than the original conditions, while social stigma prevents many people from seeking help even when their lives are in immediate danger, resulting in preventable deaths that could be easily avoided with proper medical knowledge and intervention. The violence that erupts during final day activities proves more deadly than earlier conflicts because participants have lost the physical coordination necessary to defend themselves effectively while retaining access to weapons and the emotional volatility that makes conflict inevitable in highly charged social situations where honor, politics, and personal rivalry intersect in explosive combinations. The breakdown of normal social restraints creates conditions where minor disputes escalate instantly into deadly encounters claiming multiple lives and creating lasting trauma for survivors who must live with consequences of actions taken while their moral and intellectual faculties were completely compromised by alcohol, transforming celebration into massacre that destroys families and communities for generations. The political consequences of final day behavior often prove more devastating than immediate physical damage, as actions taken while severely intoxicated destroy carefully negotiated alliances, ruin business relationships built over decades, and create family enemies that persist for generations, turning what should be celebration into the source of conflicts affecting multiple families for years to come. The permanent nature of political and social damage contrasts sharply with alcohol's temporary effects, creating situations where a few hours of impaired judgment undo years of careful diplomatic positioning and relationship building, leaving families isolated, economically vulnerable, and politically powerless in the complex web of medieval social relationships that determine everything from marriage prospects to business opportunities. The cleanup and aftermath of the celebration reveal the true cost of medieval drinking customs as families count the dead and injured, assess political damage from drunken behavior, calculate economic losses from destroyed relationships, and attempt to repair social connections shattered by alcohol-fueled conflicts that could have been avoided entirely if medieval society possessed any understanding of responsible consumption or effective intervention strategies for dangerous intoxication. The bodies of guests who died from alcohol poisoning, violence, or accidents are carried away quietly to avoid embarrassing the hosts, while survivors struggle with injuries, trauma, and the social consequences of behavior they cannot remember. but must live with forever. The normalization of such outcomes as acceptable costs of celebration perpetuates a cycle of alcohol-related violence and tragedy that makes medieval social life far more dangerous and unpredictable than necessary, as each generation learns to accept horrific casualties as the price of maintaining social traditions that serve no purpose beyond demonstrating wealth and creating opportunities for political alliance building that could be accomplished through safer means if medieval culture valued human life over social display. The ritual nature of these celebrations ensures their continuation despite their devastating consequences, trapping medieval society in patterns of self-destructive behavior disguised as joyous festivity. As you somehow survive this 3-day descent into alcoholic hell and begin the long process of physical recovery from an experience that has permanently damaged your health, compromised your relationships, and exposed you to dangers that could easily have resulted in death or permanent disability, you finally understand why wise individuals often avoid major celebrations entirely or participate only minimally in drinking customs that transform supposedly joyous occasions into nightmarish ordeals where survival depends more on luck than skill. The supposed pleasures of alcohol consumption are far outweighed by very real risks of violence, accident, poisoning, and social disaster that make medieval wedding feasts among the most dangerous social events civilized humans have ever devised, revealing the brutal realities lurking beneath the elaborate facade of medieval courtly culture.